step into the golden era of American entertainment and discover the remarkable journey of Ricky Nelson, born Eric Hilliard Nelson, whose magnetic presence forever changed the landscape of rock and roll. From his earliest appearances on The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet to his meteoric rise as a 1950s teen idol, this story captures both the dazzling spotlight and the quieter challenges of a young star growing up under the relentless gaze of Hollywood. Get ready to uncover how Rick's transformation from a soft-spoken child actor into a pioneering country rock artist shaped modern music and left an indelible mark on pop culture worldwide. Beneath the quiet springtime skies of Teaneck, New Jersey, in the year 1940, a soft-spoken miracle entered the world. Eric Hilliard Nelson, soon to be adored by millions as Ricky, came into a family already woven into the fabric of American show business. His father, Ozzie Nelson, was known for his big band leadership and suave musical instincts. His mother, Harriet, had a warm, honey-smooth singing voice that had accompanied Ozzie's group. Show business practically crackled in their household. Visitors who stepped inside might hear Harriet rehearsing vocal parts in the kitchen, while Ozzie laid out carefully orchestrated rhythms in the living room. It was a household spinning on a merry-go-round of radio broadcasts, manager phone calls, and sheet music strewn across tables. Into this environment came Ricky, an unassuming newborn who from the very beginning was destined to split his childhood between everyday family life and the dazzling spectacle of performance. When Ricky was around 8, the Nelsons moved from Tenafly, New Jersey to sunny California so that they could pursue a radio sitcom called The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet. It was a show that cast a whimsical spell over American airwaves, bringing comedic sketches and light-hearted family dilemmas to households all across the country. Before long, in 1949, a shy Ricky found himself standing at a microphone, delivering lines on the radio version of this sitcom, a gig that might intimidate a more outgoing child, let alone someone introspective like Ricky. But there he was, voice slightly trembling, yet undeniably captivating. Something about his sincerity gripped listeners. It might have been the way he paused or the genuine timbre that crept into his small voice, making him sound like a next-door neighbor's friendly kid. Ozzie and Harriet, always watchful, gave him gentle nudges of encouragement. Ozzie, who had the experience of shepherding a band and working with all sorts of musicians, recognized a spark in his younger son. By 1952, The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet leapt triumphantly to television, and now the American public could put a face to the boy they'd heard on the radio. On screen, Ricky was overshadowed by the comedic dynamic of his parents and his older brother David, but that was only for a while. Soon enough, viewers started noticing his nuanced charm, a quiet kind of magnetism that didn't demand your attention but invited it. He was the kid in the corner of the living room set, saying fewer lines, but leaving a subtle impression that you couldn't quite shake. If you were a typical viewer tuning in, you might laugh at Ozzie's latest confusion or Harriet's motherly quips, but your eyes would drift to Ricky's half-formed grin and wonder what he was really thinking. That question was answered in 1957 when a 16-year-old Ricky picked up a microphone on the show and belted out Fats Domino's "I'm Walkin'." Up until that moment, people knew him primarily as the adorable teenage actor from TV. In the next moment, they realized he was also a formidable singer. He'd been tinkering with music for a while, banging out rockabilly lines in garages, playing around with acoustic guitars, absorbing the boogie-woogie rhythms of early rock and roll. But "I'm Walkin'" was like lightning in a bottle, raw, energetic, and delivered with an effortless cool that belied his shy offstage demeanor. Millions of living rooms lit up with excitement. Parents might have been amused to see that Nelson boy singing, but teenagers felt a jolt of recognition. Here was one of their own, a fresh-faced kid from a wholesome TV show, diving headfirst into the vibrant waters of rock and roll. Record labels pounced. Within what felt like days, Ricky signed with Verve, and soon his very first single, A Teenager's Romance, soared to number 1. 2 on the Billboard Hot 100, selling over 1 million copies. The follow-up, Bebop Baby, reached number 1. 3, a double success that pushed Ricky's self-titled debut album, Ricky, to a chart-topping number 1. And with that, his path was set. America had found a new teen idol. If Elvis Presley was the smoldering, hip-thrusting archetype, Ricky Nelson offered a gentler allure. He had the same driving rockabilly rhythms, but with a boy-next-door warmth that made parents almost relieved to see their daughters swooning over him. He radiated a kind of earnestness that was both genuine and carefully nurtured by his parents and the show. Teen magazines clamored for interviews, describing him as a dream date in neat sweaters and breezy, confident smiles. By the tail end of the 1950s, Ricky was unstoppable. He switched labels to Imperial Records and continued racking up hits, working closely with guitarist James Burton, whose bright, twanging style added a signature dimension to Ricky's sound. Poor Little Fool claimed the distinction of being the very first number 1 single on the newly formed Billboard Hot 100 chart in 1958. From there, hits followed with the force of a flood. Lonesome Town, Travelin' Man, and Hello Mary Lou, among others. By 1962, he'd sold over 20 million records, an astounding figure that put him shoulder to shoulder with Elvis. His face was everywhere, on record sleeves, on the covers of teen magazines, and, of course, every week on the adventures of Ozzie and Harriet. No teen star had ever been showcased so extensively on a family sitcom, and no family sitcom had ever benefited so directly from a teen's sudden rocket to musical stardom. At times, it almost blurred the line between show and reality. Viewers could watch Ricky's fictional self at home on Thursday night, then walk to a corner record store on Friday morning to buy his latest single. His crossover into the film world also surprised many. In 1959, legendary director Howard Hawks cast him in Rio Bravo alongside John Wayne and Dean Martin. At first glance, the idea of the boyish teen idol in a Western with such rugged icons might have seemed incongruous, but Ricky pulled it off with disarming ease. Sharing the screen with John Wayne, he stood tall, occasionally trading lines with Wayne's tough guy swagger. He even sang My Rifle, My Pony and Me, a gentle melodic interlude that tempered the movie's machismo. Audiences responded positively, and the film grossed around $12 million. Quite a haul at the time, proving that Ricky was more than just a fleeting pop star. He had broad appeal that could bridge family-friendly television, rock and roll mania, and the dusty landscapes of a Western movie set. But as the 1960s wore on, the musical landscape shifted dramatically. British bands like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones triggered a cultural explosion known as the British Invasion. The frenzied mania for guitars and mop tops changed the rules of the rock and roll game, leaving many earlier stars, Ricky included, scrambling to adapt. He dropped the Y from his name to seem more mature, rebranding himself as Rick Nelson in 1961. Though he maintained a loyal fan base, his steady string of mega hits began to wane. Radio playlists were devoting more and more slots to British acts, and the tinge of squeaky clean youth that had fueled Ricky's popularity now felt outdated to a generation leaning toward edgier acts. Rick, however, wasn't content to drift into the "Where Are They Now" file. By 1969, he formed the Stone Canyon Band, responding to an artistic itch to expand beyond the pop rock formula he'd practiced on TV. Embracing country rock before it was a mainstream phenomenon, Rick dived into a style that drew inspiration from traditional country, folk rock, and contemporary singer-songwriters. It was a risky departure, but creatively thrilling. Their cover of Bob Dylan's "She Belongs to Me" hit number 33, no chart topper, yet a signal that Rick could still muster an audience, especially when he challenged himself with new material. The Stone Canyon Band's sound laid the groundwork for what would soon become a full-blown country rock movement, thanks to acts like the Eagles, Linda Ronstadt, and others who blended the twang of country with the melodic hooks of rock. In 1972, Rick penned an especially personal track, "Garden Party," inspired by a concert at Madison Square Garden in 1971 that had turned sour when the audience booed his newer material, clamoring for the old Ricky. It stung to be reminded that the persona he was so eager to outgrow was exactly what many fans still wanted, but he refused to retreat. Instead, he answered with "Garden Party," a reflection on identity, artistry, and the burden of an audience's expectations. The single soared to number 1, 6 on the pop chart, and number 1 on the country chart, selling over 1 million copies. It was validation that Rick's evolution, while bumpy, was still resonating with a wide swath of listeners. By stepping into the realm of country, he also opened doors that would lead him to the Grand Ole Opry in 1974, a nearly unprecedented feat for an artist once branded as a teenage rock idol. His presence there symbolized how fluid the boundaries of American music could be. After all, this was the shy kid from a TV sitcom who used to pose in Letterman sweaters on album covers. Now he was being embraced by the venerable institution of country music. It helped pave the way for future cross-genre artists, normalizing the idea that a rock star could step onto a stage known primarily for fiddles and cowboy hats. Behind the scenes, however, Rick's life was becoming a tangle of personal upheavals. While the audience still remembered the wholesome all-American family from the adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, the real Nelson household was more complicated. Raised under studio lights, Rick had struggled to establish a firm sense of himself outside the show. Even though he once told Rolling Stone that the show was home, he admitted that the stage was freedom. Perhaps he was expressing his quiet tension, feeling safe within his family's comedic bubble, but also yearning for the creative license that playing live music afforded him. That tension seeped into his relationships as well. In 1961, he began dating Kristen Harmon, an actress from a family closely entwined with the Hollywood circuit. Her brother-in-law was Dean Martin. Their 1963 wedding was an event that soared beyond a private celebration. It was featured in an episode of Ozzie and Harriet, illustrating how tightly his real life was wrapped up in fictionalized showbiz. He was just 22 when he said his vows, and soon he and Kristen had 4 children. Tracy, born in 1963, twins Gunnar and Matthew in 1967, and Sam in 1974. But marriage came with its challenges. Kristen battled alcoholism, and fidelity issues plagued the relationship. The press hungrily snapped up any morsels they could find, and by 1982, the couple divorced. A bitter custody fight over Sam ensued, shining a harsh spotlight on a family whose intimate affairs had been so public for so long. It was a far cry from the happy illusions once perpetuated on their old television show. While Rick continued to focus on music, the emotional toll was evident. Critics of the day sometimes noted that his voice carried a deeper sense of longing in those later years, a subdued sadness that might have echoed his personal struggles. Nor did his troubles end with marital drama. Like many musicians of the 1970s, Rick found himself dancing precariously with cocaine. By 1977, he was arrested for possession in Los Angeles. Although he paid only a $500 fine, the incident was a stark reminder of how easy it was to slip into the destructive habits fostered by constant touring and easy access to substances. Determined to straighten up, he managed to get clean by 1980. Yet another demon waited in the wings, the IRS. With his once colossal record sales largely behind him, and with poor financial planning that hadn't accounted for the possibility of stardom fading, Rick soon faced a tax debt of about $1 million. He took on hectic touring schedules, performing sometimes in 200 shows a year just to stave off the creditors. No longer the top-billed star on massive tours, he navigated the oldies circuit with a certain resigned dignity, still pouring his heart into performances, but aware that the industry had labeled him a nostalgia act. In 1981, he released Playing to Win, a record that tried to recapture some of his prior rock passion, spliced with the updated sensibilities of the new decade. Critics found it a mixed bag. Some praised the heartfelt approach, while others lamented that the production felt dated in an era dominated by synth pop and new wave. Commercially, it didn't do much to solve his financial woes, but for Rick, it was another step in an ongoing journey of reinvention. Always he believed that a big break was still possible, that he might yet land a single that radio programmers couldn't resist. Rumor had it that he was on the verge of signing a comeback deal with MCA in 1985. He had fresh songs in the pipeline, and though nothing was certain in the cutthroat music business, the spark of hope remained. No one expected what happened next. On December 31st, 1985, Rick boarded a DC-3 plane with his fiancée, Helen Blair, just 27 years old, and members of his band, en route to a New Year's Eve performance in Dallas. It was a routine flight, the sort that Rick had taken countless times before, zigzagging across the country to give shows that kept him afloat financially. This time, however, tragedy struck. A faulty cabin heater triggered a fire mid-flight, and the plane crashed near DeKalb, Texas, killing all on board except the pilot and co-pilot, who escaped through cockpit windows. The shocking news spread across the nation. Fans who had grown up watching Ricky on television, cheering for him in the 1950s and 1960s, found it difficult to comprehend. He was 45, young by any measure, with children who needed him, with music left unwritten. The immediate media frenzy speculated about drug use or freebasing causing the fire. But an NTSB investigation in 1986 cleared up the rumors. It was simply mechanical failure. That final tragic day sealed his fate. Eric Hilliard Nelson was gone. The funeral took place at Forest Lawn Memorial Park, drawing a crowd that included his brother David, old family friends, and even celebrities like Chris Christopherson, who recognized Rick's unique place in the American musical tapestry. Rick's ashes were scattered off the coast of Malibu. In the months that followed, the airwaves filled with tribute specials. Jockeys at oldies stations played Hello Mary Lou and Garden Party, providing an echo of simpler times. Despite the wave of sorrow, Rick's legacy did not slip into obscurity. Instead, an appreciation began to form, a deeper understanding of how he had connected the dots between early rock and roll and the emerging sounds of country rock, bridging generations along the way. In 1987, Rick Nelson was posthumously inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, a long overdue acknowledgement of his impact on shaping the modern rock landscape. He'd once been overshadowed by Elvis, but many recognize that if Elvis was the king, Rick was at least a princely figure in the same domain, someone who had introduced a massive mainstream audience to rockabilly and early rock rhythms. Decades later, country music also recognized his forward-thinking contributions. In 2023, Rick's name was added to the roster of the Country Music Hall of Fame, spotlighting his role in legitimizing country rock crossover. Those who had danced to Garden Party or marveled at his performance in the Stone Canyon Band understood the significance of that recognition. He was no mere teen idol. He was a boundary pusher, quietly weaving musical styles together in a way that would shape future acts. As the years rolled on, Rick's children carried the torch in their own ways. Tracy pursued acting. Gunnar and Matthew formed a band called Nelson that scored hits in the early 1990s. And Sam, once the center of a tug-of-war custody battle, grew up conscious of his father's layered legacy. By the mid-2010s and into the 2020s, the internet era began ushering in a fresh wave of nostalgia. YouTube videos of I'm Walkin' from the Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet introduced new generations to that iconic moment in 1957, when a teenage Ricky served as a conduit between wholesome television and the wild spirit of rock and roll. Curiosity spiked. People who had never known him in real time became fans, devouring clips of those old black and white episodes. Then in 2024, the release of a comprehensive box set, Ricky Nelson, Rebel Heart, ignited more interest. Through carefully remastered tracks, fans could trace the arc of his career, from bright-eyed teenage rockabilly to introspective country rock pioneer. They could see the synergy he had with James Burton's guitar, hear the evolving nuances of his voice as he matured, and catch glimpses of the raw heartbreak that bled into his later recordings. The set charted, confirming that Rick's music still held relevance even in a streaming-dominated age. Meanwhile, Garden Party began popping up on retro playlists in 2025, its play count soaring on Spotify and Apple Music. Younger listeners who stumbled across it found the lyrics surprisingly modern. The theme, an artist grappling with an audience's demand for old hits, remains evergreen in a music world driven by nostalgia tours and reunion gigs. On reality shows like The Voice, a cover of Unchained Melody might be dedicated to Rick's memory, with the host reminding viewers that Rick had once incorporated that timeless track into his sets. And so, in subtle increments, his name stayed afloat in popular culture. And so ends our deep dive into the life of Ricky Nelson, a trailblazer whose evolution from shy on-screen youngster to chart-topping rockabilly sensation continues to inspire artists and captivate fans across generations. Whether you first encountered his iconic hits on classic radio or discovered them on streaming platforms today, his legacy as a teen idol turned true innovator remains undeniable. If you've enjoyed this exploration of Rick Nelson's timeless influence on rock, country, and American show business, be sure to subscribe, comment, and share the story so others can experience the magic of this unforgettable legend. Stay tuned for more revealing looks into the artists and trends that shaped our musical heritage.